Imagine a scenario in which they discovered that an asteroid was hurtling towards planet Earth, and it was inevitable. It was the kind of thing that was going to kill half the life on planet Earth, and there's nothing we could do about it. Now let me ask you, how would you spend what little time you had left in anticipation of that event? Would you spend every waking moment in your backyard digging a bunker so that you would be one of the few people who might survive? Or would you recognize and accept that a bad thing was happening and it was outside of your control? So you would use that time to maximize whatever good you could do with what little time you had left. You could spend that time getting right with God and or getting right with other people. You could spend that time saying and doing the things with loved ones that perhaps the distractions of daily life have compelled you to neglect. How you respond to that question says a lot about your priorities. And I will admit, it's a very imperfect analogy for what I'm going to be talking about in this video, but I do think that there's enough shared there that I'm going to revisit it before the end of this video. So I would invite you to keep it in the back of your mind until we get there. Now, I'm not the kind of person who would stubbornly insist that there is never a case for us to consider locking ourselves down in order to avoid some greater catastrophe that might be headed our way. But there is a case to be made for why lockdowns are a bad idea. And since that case hasn't been given much breathing room in the debate and the discourse that's taking place right now, I thought I would share some thoughts on it. The first thing I think we all need to admit is that locking ourselves down is an extreme measure which can have devastating effects. It's the kind of thing that can plunge people into economic despair because of unemployment or lost income. It can breed isolation and loneliness. It can exacerbate mental health issues. It can place sundry vulnerable people at risk of domestic abuse. And it can discourage countless people from accessing necessary checkups and screenings for their health, which, if avoided, will be the difference between life and death. And because of these kinds of effects, I've read some estimates which say that the last lockdown caused far greater loss of human life than it prevented. For example, according to researcher, policy, and healthcare expert Dr. Scott Atlas, the so-called deaths of despair, so this is like suicide and drug overdoses, they've dramatically risen and will continue to rise well after the lockdowns. And estimates as high as 46% of the most common kinds of cancers, which would get caught by routine cancer screenings, have gone undiagnosed, which means by the time that they are caught, they're going to be stage 3 or 4 rather than stage 1 or 2, which is going to dramatically increase the mortality of those instances. Half of people who had chemotherapy treatments scheduled did not show up. Half of the people who had immunization scheduled did not show up. During the last lockdown, just during the lockdown, there were over 200,000 cases of child abuse in the US that went unreported because there was nobody outside of that domestic situation to notice that there was anything wrong. Another statistic I read said that for every 1% increase in unemployment, there is a 2.8% increase in the rate of suicide. And in the province I live in, during the last lockdown, the rate of unemployment went from about 7% to over 15%, which is an increase of over 8%. And I'll leave you to do the math on what that means for the rate of suicide. And take a second to think about what this does for the mental and social development of kids. We were told originally that this was going to be a 1-month kind of lockdown to flatten the curve. But now this has been going on for months, approaching a year. And when you're a kid, a year seems like a lifetime. And that's because they're absorbing every experience and being irrevocably formed by them. They're making irreversible neurological connections. And when you're 7 years old, a year is 1/7 of your life. And in that time, they've gotten used to the idea that they are a danger to other people and other people are a danger to them. So keep your distance. And faces, which are where most nonverbal communication precipitates from, well, those need to be covered up, which means that we're not going to learn some of those nonverbal communication techniques. And lastly, rights and freedoms, well, those just don't count for very much. Almost every time that I see a minor outside by themselves, they're wearing a mask. I went for my morning run today and I ran past a bus stop where there was a teenager at the bus stop by himself with a mask on, and I wasn't wearing a mask because that would be a health hazard while you're running, and he looked at me like I just threatened to murder him. These are not healthy and rational lessons for them to be learning. And don't get me wrong, there are justifiable reasons why we might take these kinds of measures, but the question remains, Is the threat that we're currently facing a justifiable reason? Any effective and worthy policymaker knows that before you implement some policy, you have to do some kind of a cost-benefit analysis, such that if the cost is greater than the benefit, then you don't implement the policy. And somewhat absurdly, I haven't heard anybody talking about that kind of cost-benefit analysis except for the premier in the province I live in, Jason Kenney. And he's taken a lot of flack from the media and the pro-lockdown policy advocates who want to take a defeat COVID at all costs approach to this thing, even if those costs are worse than the disease itself. If the measures we're willing to take have equally or even greater devastating negative effects, such that we are taking a death toll from a column let's call COVID-19 and transferring them to another column called the lockdown, then what have we accomplished? We've been desperately scrambling to survive, like that person digging a bunker in their backyard, but the thing that we were trying to mitigate, it came for us anyways, and it seems to still be coming for us anyways. Instead, we could have used that time to do some other good that would have been available to us. Like, imagine being an elderly person, someone in their 80s who is severely at risk of dying if they catch this thing, who could have spent the final moments of your life saying and doing the things that matter most with your loved ones. But instead, you've been locked down in an assisted care facility until the virus catches up to you anyways, and you die isolated and alone. That is what we've actually done to a considerable number of people. The average age of death from COVID in the province I live in is the same as the average lifespan, which is 82 years old. All of those people were forced to lock down and be isolated from their loved ones and alone until the virus finally caught up to them and they died anyways, again, isolated and alone. And that, my friends, that is an unspeakable cruelty. And we are guilty of it. And there are those out there advocating that we do it again. So what does this say about our priorities? It says to me that survival at all costs is our highest priority, such that we will implement irrational policies that do nothing more than move loss of life from one column to another column in the hopes that somehow we'll end up in the right column when it's all said and done. And how's this for a measure of our distorted priorities? Easter was canceled during the last lockdown. Thanksgiving was canceled for quite a few people, and now we're facing the threat of Christmas being canceled. But you know what isn't canceled? Black Friday. Notice that when we started to reopen, the highest priority was getting people back to work. They said you can go back to work, but limit your social interactions, which is to say money matters, but your relationships don't. Massive corporations like Walmart and Amazon, they're doing just fine through this whole thing. But the local baker, the local mechanic, the local retailer, sorry guys, you're out of business. There is a massive transfer of wealth taking place from small business owners and the working class to the monopolies. And this is just one more way in which our society is being irreversibly reset by those in power. And the policymakers, those who are supposed to be protecting us from this kind of thing, they're just letting it happen. I probably, like you, live in a democracy, or so I've been told, which is this concept in which the government is supposed to represent the people, which is the best approximation we've been able to devise that will reflect the will of the majority. In Canada, we have what's called a representative democracy, which is, again, very similar to most democracies, which means that we, the people, are supposed to govern through our representatives. And it's what informs statements like the one that Abraham Lincoln made in his Gettysburg Address, where he said, the government is by the people, for the people. Now, this whole experiment that we call democracy, it can only work if we trust that those people can govern, especially self-govern. In other words, they don't need to be told what to do through force of coercion. So for any kind of lockdown to be compatible with democracy, it can't be the kind that disregards the inalienable rights of those people, and it can't be the kind that concedes a lack of trust in those people to make the right decisions and to self-govern. So at best, all the authorities can really do is to give us the information, the relevant information, so that we can make wise choices, and then to make recommendations based on that. What they can't do is force policies like a lockdown upon us, because if they do so, then we've conceded that we are no longer a representative democracy. Now, I'm not saying that democracy is the best possible political system. There are a lot of good arguments against democracy. What I am objecting to is this notion that we are being told that we're a democracy while conceding that the authorities don't trust that the people can make reasonable decisions for themselves, instead forcing decisions that they've determined are best. In closing, I want to revisit that analogy from the beginning, because when our lives are under threat, it says a lot about our priorities. And as a Catholic, my priority is to remind myself that this life is not for keeps, and that I should hold it loosely. And when I do, I find that my temporal priorities shift as well. For my part, I am going to prioritize saying and doing the things with loved ones that I don't necessarily always do because I take tomorrow for granted. That is, unless the authorities say I can't. And if I can say this in closing to my Catholic audience, a bad thing is happening to us. And our distorted attempts to try to manage that and to manage the costs have proven futile. So really only God can save us. If he doesn't exist, well, we're screwed. But if he does exist, then the best thing we can be doing right now is prayer and worship. And if anybody tries to take that away from you, you shouldn't be rolling over. Hey, thanks for watching that. If you enjoyed it, then be sure to like and subscribe for more. And if you want to support the making of content like this, then please consider joining my online community, The Reinforcements. It's kind of like Patreon, but instead of being beholden to a big tech company, it's a website I built entirely myself. So there's no risk of us being censored or shut down or anything like that. There are hundreds of people who have already signed up, and our mission is to renew and reinforce the church. So if that's you, then come check it out. As an added bonus for certain tiers, I will also send you a gift box from Glory and Shine, which is a Catholic, family-owned and operated company. They make bath and body products. They're actually their beard balm I'm supporting, or I'm sporting right now. I'm not just a spokesperson, I'm actually a customer. So even if you don't join the Reinforcements, maybe check them out anyways. Glory and Shine, they're an amazing company.